Weeks later, as it docked at Luna Station, Chris Monroe stepped out and was met not by generals, but by his sister, holding a handmade sign that read, "Welcome home, Big Brother." He hugged her tight, his flight suit still smelling of alien air. Dr. Ruiz went straight to her lab, not to celebrate, but to begin work on a new project, using cryo-nanites to preserve organs for transplant across the solar system. Ben Carter started teaching a class on ethical engineering at the Luna Institute. Admiral Grant returned to Ares 7, where she ordered the first joint training exercise with a Velnari science vessel. Life went on. But it was different now. Across the galaxy, small changes followed. The Krell began reviewing their own policies on younger species. The Lumini proposed a new cultural exchange program. Even the Zenthari, who rarely spoke to outsiders, sent a message to Earth requesting help with a failing reactor, using Frostline tech, under human supervision. Humanity said yes. Years later, historians would call this moment the turning. Not because of weapons or wars, but because of a choice. A choice to answer fear not with fire, but with frost. Not with silence, but with sense. On Xylos Prime, Kalis Vor often stood at the same observation deck, where she had once watched Earth's silence with dread. Now she watched human ships come and go, trading, learning, helping. One evening, an aide asked her what she thought of humanity now. She smiled, a rare thing for a Velnari. "They taught us that dignity does not come from age or power. It comes from how you treat others when you hold the advantage." She looked out at the stars, and they held it all. Back on Earth, President Hayes walked through a park in Chicago, just as he had before the crisis. Children played on swings. Couples strolled hand in hand. The sky was blue, the air warm. He stopped by a bench and sat down, watching the world breathe. A little girl ran up to him, holding a drawing. It showed a silver cloud freezing a big alien ship, with a small human vessel nearby offering a hand. "Is this what really happened?" she asked. Hayes took the drawing gently. "Not exactly," he said, "but it's close enough." He kept the drawing in his pocket for the rest of his life, and as the sun set over the city, no alarms sounded. No warnings flashed. Just peace, earned not by shouting but by standing firm in the cold and choosing warmth anyway. Everything felt okay. Analysts debated whether this was genius or madness. Most agreed on one thing. Humans did not behave like any other species they had ever encountered. On Xylos Prime, the council chamber remained tense. Gorvak still pushed for war, his voice booming through the halls like thunder, but fewer beings stood with him now. The Lumini had released a public statement praising humanity's measured restraint. The Zenthari quietly shared sensor data, showing that not a single human ship had fired a weapon during the entire incident. Even the Krell Military Council, known for its iron discipline, sent a private inquiry asking how the cryo-nanites worked. Kalis Vor used that opening. She called a closed-door session with the top science delegates from 12 major species. On the table sat a sealed container holding deactivated nanites recovered from the Dawn's resolve. "This is not a weapon," she said, her voice calm but firm. "It is a tool, and tools can be shared." Murmurs filled the room. Sharing technology with a non-member species was unheard of. But Kalis pressed on. "What if humanity offered us the design? Not as a threat, but as a gift? What would that say about them?" One by one, the delegates fell silent. They understood the implication. If humans gave away their secret freely, it would prove they sought partnership, not dominance. Back on Earth, President Hayes received a secure message from Admiral Grant. "They're listening," it read. "Now we show them who we really are." Hayes nodded. He called a small team to the White House basement, a room with no windows and walls lined with signal dampeners. Among them were Dr. Elena Ruiz, Chris Monroe, and a quiet engineer named Ben Carter who had helped design the nanites' core programming. "We're going to send them the schematics," Hayes said. "All of it. Full access." But with one condition, Ben frowned. "They could reverse engineer it." "Use it against us, maybe," Hayes replied. "But if we keep it secret, we become the very thing they accused us of being. Hoarders of power. We either trust them, or we admit we're afraid." The room was still for a long moment. Then Elena spoke. "Send it. But build in a failsafe. A kill switch only we control. Not to threaten them, to protect everyone if it's ever misused." Hayes smiled. "That's the spirit. Within hours, a data packet left Earth's main comms array. It traveled through secure quantum channels, unencrypted, addressed to HFY War personally. It contained everything: molecular blueprints, activation protocols, safety limits, even suggested improvements. Attached was a short note: use it wisely. We built it to stop war, not start one. When Kalis opened the file, she sat alone in her quarters for a full hour. She read every line, studied every diagram. Then she called Orlan of the Lumini. They gave it to us, she whispered. No tricks. No hidden code, just trust. Orlan's form shimmered with quiet awe. Perhaps they understand something we forgot. That true strength lies not in control, but in giving it away. The next day, Kalis stood before the full council. She held up a data crystal. Humanity has shared their technology with us. Not as a demand, not as a bribe, but as an offer of peace. She paused, letting the words sink in. I move that we accept it, and that we open formal talks with Earth. Gorvax rose, his armor clanking. This is weakness. They froze our ships and now pretend to be generous? No, Kalis said, meeting his gaze. They showed us we were wrong, and instead of rubbing it in, they handed us a way to do better. That is not weakness. That is honor. A vote was called. This time the result was not unanimous, but it was clear. 78 in favor, 42 opposed. The rest abstained. Talks would begin. On Earth, the news spread fast. Not through official channels, but through the quiet hum of relief that passed from person to person. In cafes, on street corners, in space stations orbiting Neptune, people allowed themselves to breathe again. They had not backed down. They had not started a war. And now the galaxy might finally see them as equals. Admiral Grant ordered all Frostline platforms to stand down. The nanites already in space would deactivate on their own within weeks. No more ships would be frozen. The message had been sent. Chris Monroe was assigned to a new mission, not combat, but diplomacy. He would fly the Horizon, a small unarmed vessel, to Xylos Prime as part of Earth's first official delegation. He packed his bag with care, including a photo of his younger sister, who had written him a note. Make them see us. Dr. Ruiz prepared a presentation explaining how the nanites could be used for peaceful purposes, cooling reactors during meltdowns, preserving medical supplies in deep space, even helping terraform hot planets. She hoped someone would listen. President Hayes did not prepare a grand speech. He simply wrote 3 sentences on a notepad and tucked it into his pocket. We are not your enemy. We never were. Let's build something better together. As the Horizon lifted off from Luna, its hull gleaming under Earth's blue light, people across the Sol system watched on screens large and small. No music played. No crowds cheered. But millions stood a little taller, knowing their species had chosen wisdom over wrath. On Xylos Prime, HFY War stood at the arrival bay, her hands clasped before her. She did not know what to expect. Would the humans be proud? Angry? Cold? When the airlock opened and Chris Monroe stepped out, followed by Dr. Ruiz and 2 quiet aides, he did not salute. He did not bow. He simply nodded and said, We come in peace. And with hope. Kalis returned the nod. Then let us hope together. Behind her, Gorvax watched from the shadows, his arms crossed. He did not believe in peace. But even he could not deny the quiet power in the way these humans carried themselves. Not as conquerors, not as beggars, but as neighbors. The talks would be long. Trust would take time. But for the first time in centuries, the Galactic Council was not speaking down to a younger species, they were listening. And humanity, having spoken with ice, now offered warmth, the Galactic Council's final warning, and humanity's icy response part. The talks lasted 27 days. They were held in a neutral wing of the Xylos Prime complex, far from the Grand Chamber where the ultimatum had been issued. No cameras, no public records, just humans and aliens sitting around a plain table, speaking plainly about fear, respect, and the future. At first, the conversations were stiff. The Krell delegates watched every human gesture like it might hide a weapon. The Velnari asked careful questions, testing for hidden meanings. But slowly something changed. Chris Monroe, who had never been to another world before, found himself explaining baseball to a curious Xanthari scientist. Dr. Elena Ruiz shared coffee with HFY War and talked about raising children under 2 sons versus 1. Admiral Lisa Grant, calm and direct, walked Gorvax through Earth's history. Not the wars, but the recoveries, the rebuildings, the times humanity chose to help even when it cost them. Gorvax listened. He did not agree at first, but he listened. By the third week, the humans had done something no species had ever managed. They made the council laugh. Not out of mockery, but real laughter. It happened when Ben Carter, the engineer, tried to describe how humans used duct tape to fix everything from broken chairs to spaceship panels. The Lumini delegate shimmered with delight. Even Gorvax let out a low chuckle. That small moment broke the ice more than any treaty could. On the final day, the two sides gathered not in the meeting room, but in the open garden beneath Xylos Prime's twin moons. The air was cool, scented with alien flowers that glowed faintly in the dusk. President Daniel Hayes stood beside Kalis Vor, both of them holding simple data slates. Hayes spoke first. "We don't want special treatment. We don't want a rule. We just want a seat at the table and the right to protect our people the way we see fit." Kalis nodded. "And we have learned that your way is not reckless. It is different. And difference is not danger." She turned to the assembled delegates and raised her voice. "Today, the Galactic Council adopts a new charter clause. No species shall be judged by its age, its size, or its past. Only by its actions in the present," she paused, "and by its willingness to trust." A murmur of agreement rose from the crowd. Even Gorvax gave a slow, grudging nod. The agreement was signed. Humanity would keep all its colonies. Its fleet would remain under its own command. In return, Earth agreed to share Frostline technology under strict ethical guidelines and to join a new joint task force focused on disaster response, not war, but rescue. As the ceremony ended, Kalis walked with Hayes along a quiet path. "You could have hidden your tech," she said. "You could have used it to demand power." Hayes looked up at the stars. "Power taken by force doesn't last. But trust, that builds something real." Back on Earth, the news spread like sunrise. Not with fanfare, but with quiet pride. In schools, teachers showed children images of the signing. In factories, workers paused their shifts to watch the broadcast. On Mars, colonists gathered in domes and raised glasses of recycled water in silent toast. No one declared victory. They didn't need to. The horizon returned home too. Sage ships still moved between colonies. Power grids remained stable. No mass evacuations. No panic buying. It was as if nothing had changed. And that worried her more than any fleet buildup would have. She called a private meeting with the Lumini delegate, a soft-spoken being of light and mist named Orlan. "Do you think they are planning something?" she asked. Orlan shimmered gently. "Humans do not think like us. They do not always speak when threatened. Sometimes they listen, and then they act." Kalis frowned. "Act how?" "I do not know," Orlan admitted. "But I have studied their history. When cornered, they do not break. They adapt, and they surprise." Back in the Sol system, Project Frostline entered its final phase. The first batch of cryonanites was loaded onto stealth freighters disguised as mining haulers. Their destination, the Theta 9 frontier, where Council patrol ships had been stationed since the warning. The plan was simple. No weapons, no explosions. Just release the nanites near enemy vessels and let physics do the rest. The nanites would latch onto hulls, drain thermal energy and freeze critical systems, engines, sensors, life support regulators, without harming the crew. The ships would drift cold and dark but alive. It was not an attack. It was a statement. Admiral Grant reviewed the mission profile one last time. She knew the risks. If the Council saw this as aggression, war could still come. But if it worked, it might force them to talk. "We're not trying to win a fight," she told her officers. "We're trying to avoid one." On Earth, President Hayes finally broke his public silence, but not in the way anyone expected. He didn't address the galaxy. He didn't mention the Council. Instead, he gave a short speech at a school in Chicago. Standing before a group of high school students, he said, "People will tell you that strength is about shouting the loudest or hitting the hardest. But real strength is knowing when to stay quiet, when to wait, when to trust your people to do what's right, even when no one is watching." The students clapped politely, not realizing they were hearing the heart of humanity's response. As Day 15 arrived, the first stealth freighter reached the edge of Theta 9 space. Its pilot, a quiet woman named Mara Lynn, guided the ship through asteroid fields with practiced ease. On her screen, 3 Council patrol vessels glowed in infrared. Warm, active, unaware. She activated the release sequence. A fine silver mist drifted from her ship's underbelly, carried by solar winds toward the enemy fleet. Nothing happened at first. Then one by one, the patrol ship's heat signatures began to drop. Alarms would soon blare on their bridges. Systems would fail, but no one would die. Mara turned her ship around and headed home. She didn't look back. On Xylos Prime, HFY War received an urgent message. 3 patrol ships in Theta 9 had gone dark. No distress call. No damage, just called. She stared at the report, her calm cracking for the first time. Earth had spoken, not with words, but with ice. The Galactic Council's final warning, and humanity's icy response part. 3. The first report came in as a glitch. A routine check-in from Patrol Group 7 in the Theta 9 sector failed to respond. At first, the Council's operations center assumed a comms error, but when thermal scans showed all 3 ships dropping to near absolute zero, panic spread through Xylos Prime like a virus. Engineers scrambled to understand what had happened. No weapons fire. No hull breaches. No signs of boarding. Just cold, deep, unnatural cold that clung to every surface like frost on glass. HFY War stood in the command hub, her silver skin pale with tension. She watched as live feeds showed the drifting ships, their lights dim, their engines silent. Life signs inside were stable. Crews were alive, confused, but unharmed. That made it worse. This wasn't an attack meant to kill. It was a message meant to humiliate. How? She asked, her voice tight. No one had an answer. The Velnari scientists ran every diagnostic they could imagine. Radiation? No. Energy drain? Not matching any known tech. Biological agent? Impossible. The cold was mechanical, precise. Then a junior analyst, a young Krell named Tavik, noticed something odd in the sensor logs. There's a residue, he said, zooming in on a microscopic scan. Like dust. But it's active. It's pulling heat from the metal. Kalis leaned closer. Can it be removed? Not easily, Tavik admitted. It clings like static. And it spreads. Within hours, similar reports trickled in from other frontier zones. A supply freighter near the Orion Rim froze mid-transit. 2 scout vessels near the Helios Drift lost power without warning. All showed the same strange residue. All crews were safe. All systems were locked in ice. The Council convened an emergency session. Gorvax slammed his armored fist on the table. This is war! They used a weapon we don't understand. We must retaliate before they freeze our homeworlds. But Kalis held up a hand. They left our people alive. They could have destroyed those ships. They chose not to. She turned to the chamber. This is not war. This is a warning of their own. Back in human space, Admiral Lisa Grant watched the news feeds from Xylos Prime with quiet satisfaction. Project Frostline had worked better than anyone hoped. The cryonanites had spread farther and faster than expected, carried by solar winds and magnetic fields. No shots fired. No blood spilled. Just silence and cold. She stood on the observation deck of RE-7 looking out at the stars. Chris Monroe approached, still in his flight suit, his face tired but alert. They're calling it an act of aggression on galactic news, he said. Let them, Grant replied. Truth doesn't need headlines. On Earth, President Hayes finally addressed the world, but not the galaxy. In a brief statement from the White House lawn, he said only this: We do not seek conflict, but we will not be erased. What happened out there was not an attack. It was a boundary. Cross it and you'll find more than ice waiting. He didn't explain the tech. He didn't boast. He simply stated a fact, then walked back inside. The people understood. In shipyards near Saturn, workers cheered quietly as they installed the last cryodispensers on new defense platforms. On Mars, schools held extra science lessons about thermal dynamics and nanotech, framed as future engineering, not war prep. Even children knew something big had happened. They drew pictures of silver clouds freezing alien ships, and teachers didn't correct them. Meanwhile, aboard the frozen Council patrol ship, Dawn's Resolve, Captain Nira Vex tried to stay calm. Her crew huddled in insulated suits, sharing body heat as the ship's internal temperature dropped to -50. Life support still functioned at a minimal level, but nothing else worked. Engines, comms, navigation, all locked in ice. Then, a miracle. A small human vessel appeared on her dead sensors. a medical shuttle flying under a white flag. It docked gently and a single figure stepped through the airlock. It was Dr. Elena Ruiz, wrapped in a thermal suit carrying a case of tools. "I'm here to help," she said simply. Nira stared. "Why?" "Because we didn't want you to die," Elena replied. "We just wanted you to listen." She spent 6 hours on the ship, showing the crew how to deactivate the nanites using a low-frequency pulse. As warmth slowly returned to the bridge, Nira asked, "What do you want from us?" Elena looked her in the eyes. "The same thing you wanted from us. Respect." When the shuttle left, Nira sent a private message to Kalis Vor. Not a report. Just 3 words. "They are different." On Xylos Prime, Kalis read the message and felt something shift inside her. For centuries, the Council had judged species by their age, their technology, their obedience. But humanity didn't play by those rules. They fought with brains, not just bullets. They showed mercy even when they held the upper hand. Gorvax demanded immediate military action. But this time others hesitated. The Lumini refused to support retaliation. The Zenthari, usually silent, asked for proof that Earth intended harm. Even some Krell officers whispered doubts. How could a species so young wield such control? Such restraint? Kalis called for a delay. "We need to understand what they've done before we decide what to do next," she argued. The Council, fractured for the first time in decades, agreed to wait. Back on Earth, no one celebrated. There were no parades, no victory speeches. People went to work, checked on neighbors, and kept preparing. They knew the real test was coming. The Council might still choose war. But if they did, humanity would be ready. Not with rage, but with more ice, more silence, more resolve. In the quiet of her office, Admiral Grant received a new report. Frostline nanites had reached the outer edge of Council-controlled space. 12 more ships were now drifting in the cold. She didn't smile. She just logged the data and said to her aide, "Send the thaw codes to all affected vessels. Let them go home." Because humanity's message wasn't about winning. It was about showing the galaxy that strength didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered, and sometimes it froze everything in its path without ever raising a weapon. The Galactic Council's final warning, and humanity's icy response part 4. The silence that followed the frostlock was heavier than any battle noise. Across the galaxy, species that had never paid much attention to humanity now watched Earth with new eyes. News channels replayed footage of frozen Council ships, their hulls glittering like ice sculptures against the bly. Somewhere a child laughed. And in that moment, the Galactic Council's final warning, and humanity's icy response part. The great chamber of the Galactic Council shimmered like a frozen dream. Its walls were made of living crystal that pulsed with soft blue light, rising high into a dome that opened to the stars. Hundreds of beings from across the galaxy sat in curved rows, their forms as varied as the worlds they came from. Some had scales, others feathers, many more limbs than humans, and a few floated without touching the ground at all. At the center of it all stood Kalis Vor, ambassador of the Velnari, a species known for their calm minds and long memories. She was tall and slender, her silver skin catching the light like moonlight on water. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet but carried through the chamber without effort. For the past 73 cycles, the Council had watched humanity with growing unease. Humans had only reached the stars 2 centuries ago, a blink in galactic time. Yet in that short span, they had spread across 50 star systems, built fleets faster than anyone thought possible, and fought wars with a mix of raw courage and strange tactics that left even the oldest empires confused. They did not follow the usual rules of diplomacy. They asked too many questions. They refused to bow. And worst of all, they kept winning. Kalis Vor raised her 3-fingered hand. The murmurs in the chamber fell silent. "We are gathered," she began, not in anger, but in concern. The species known as humanity has crossed boundaries set by this council. They have fortified the Theta 9 frontier without permission. They have tested weapons near neutral zones, and they have ignored 3 formal requests for cultural alignment. She paused, letting the words settle. "We have been patient, but patience has limits." From the back rows, a deep voice rumbled. It belonged to Gorvax of the Krell hegemony, a hulking figure with armored plates across his chest. "Patience? They are insects with starships. Crush them before they swarm the core worlds." Kalis turned slowly. "Violence is not our way, Gorvax. But neither is surrender. Today we issue a final warning. If humanity does not comply within 30 standard days, they will be placed under full quarantine. No trade, no travel, no communication. They will be cut off from the galaxy until they learn humility. The chamber buzzed again, but this time with agreement. Even the gentle Lumini, who rarely supported sanctions, nodded in solemn approval. The vote was called. One by one, the representatives signaled their consent. The decision was unanimous. Far away on a small blue planet circling an unremarkable yellow star, the message arrived just after dawn in Washington. DC President Daniel Hayes sat alone in the Situation Room, the glow of the holoscreen casting long shadows across his face. He was in his late 50s with tired eyes and a jaw that had seen too many tough calls. The transmission from the council played once, then again. He did not interrupt it. He did not speak. When it ended, he simply leaned back and stared at the ceiling for a full minute. Outside, the city moved as usual. Cars honked. People walked dogs. Students rushed to class. None of them knew that their entire future now hung on the next 30 days. In orbit above Earth, aboard the command station Ares 7, Admiral Lisa Grant watched the same message on a secure channel. She was in her early 40s, sharp-eyed and lean, with short brown hair and a voice that could cut steel. Around her, officers stood at attention, waiting for orders. But she gave none. Instead, she turned to her aide, a young man named Chris Monroe, and said, "Pull up the fleet status for all outer colonies, full inventory, and get me the latest from Project Frostline." Chris hesitated. "Ma'am, Frostline is still classified level Omega. Even the president hasn't cleared full deployment." "I know," she said quietly. "But if they're giving us an ultimatum, they've already decided we're enemies. We don't get to be surprised twice." Back on Earth, news of the Council's warning leaked within hours. Not officially. Governments tried to keep it quiet. But someone in communications whispered to a reporter, and soon the story was everywhere. Social media exploded. Some called for surrender, saying humanity wasn't ready for the galactic stage. Others demanded war, shouting that no alien council would tell Earth what to do. In schools, in bars, in homes from Mumbai to Buenos Aires, people argued, worried, and wondered. President Hayes finally broke his silence that evening. He didn't hold a press conference. He didn't call for unity. He simply walked out onto the White House lawn, looked up at the stars, and said to no one in particular, "They think we're loud. They think we're reckless. Maybe we are, but they don't know what we're made of." Meanwhile, deep in the asteroid belt, hidden inside a hollowed-out rock known only as Site Theta, engineers worked through the night. They weren't building weapons. Not exactly. They were assembling something smaller, quieter, stranger. Tiny machines no bigger than dust designed to do one thing perfectly: steal heat. These cryonanites could coat a ship's hull, drain its thermal energy, and leave it frozen in space, alive but helpless. The project had been theoretical for years. Now, with the Council's deadline ticking, it moved from lab to launch bay. On Mars, in a training dome under the red sky, Chris Monroe ran combat simulations in zero gravity. He didn't know about Frostline yet. He just knew something was coming. The way his instructors watched him, the extra drills, the sudden shift in mission parameters, it all pointed to real action. He wiped sweat from his brow and grinned. "Let them come," he muttered, though no one was listening. Back at the Galactic Council, Kalis Vor reviewed Earth's silence. She expected panic. She expected pleas. Instead, there was nothing. No reply, no movement, just quiet. It unsettled her more than any defiance would have. In all her centuries of service, she had never seen a species go so still before a storm. 30 days. That was all they gave humanity. 30 days to kneel. But Earth had never been good at kneeling, and as the first of those days ticked away, the humans did not beg. They did not rage. They simply prepared. In shipyards near Jupiter, welders sparked through the dark. On Luna, scientists double-checked equations. In command centers across the Sol system, officers stood a little straighter, spoke a little softer, and watched the stars with new eyes. The galaxy waited for humanity's answer, and humanity, in its own stubborn way, was already giving it, just not with words. The Galactic Council's final warning, and humanity's icy response part. 10 days passed since the Council's ultimatum, and Earth still had not replied. Not a single transmission, not a diplomatic note, not even a protest on the public galactic networks. To the rest of the galaxy, it looked like surrender. The Krell ambassador Gorvax declared victory in the mess halls of Xylos Prime, boasting that humans had finally learned their place. Even some of the smaller species, who had once admired humanity's boldness, began to whisper that Earth had folded without a fight. But on Earth and across its colonies, silence was not surrender, it was strategy. In the orbital shipyard circling Jupiter, work never stopped. Massive cranes moved between skeletal frames of new vessels, welding beams into place with blue-white flames. Robots carried crates of fusion cores while human engineers double-checked every connection. No music played. No idle chatter filled the comms. Everyone knew what was at stake. Orders came down from Ares 7, speed and secrecy. Every ship had to be ready before day 25. On Luna, inside a sealed bunker beneath the Sea of Tranquility, Dr. Elena Ruiz stood before a wall of monitors. Her dark hair was pulled back, her eyes red from lack of sleep. She watched as data streamed in from test chambers deep underground. Tiny silver clouds swirled inside vacuum tubes, cryo-nanites, each no larger than a grain of pollen, humming with quiet purpose. They responded perfectly to remote commands, spreading, clinging, and draining heat on cue. "Run it again," she said, her voice hoarse. "I want 0 failure rate." Her team nodded and reset the simulation. They had run it 83 times already. They would run it 100 more if needed. Back on Earth, life seemed normal on the surface. Children went to school. Markets stayed open. News channels talked about sports, weather, and local politics. But beneath that calm, the world was changing. Factories that once made cars now produced microreactors. Universities paused regular classes to train emergency comms operators. Even farmers in the Midwest quietly stored extra grain just in case. No one panicked. No one shouted. But everyone prepared. President Hayes met with his inner circle every morning at 5 a.m. They spoke in low voices, reviewed intelligence, and signed orders that would never appear in public records. One morning he asked, "What if they send ships before the deadline?" Admiral Grant, who joined the meeting via secure link from Ares 7, replied, "Then we show them why silence is scarier than noise." Meanwhile, Chris Monroe finished his final zero-gravity drill above Mars. He floated in the training pod, sweat beading on his forehead, heart pounding from the simulated dogfight. His instructor, a grizzled veteran named Captain Ruiz, no relation to the scientist on Luna, nodded slowly. "You're ready," he said. "Report to the Valkyrie at 0600 tomorrow. You're on active duty." Chris didn't smile. He just saluted. He knew what that meant. Across human space, similar scenes played out. Pilots were recalled from leave. Engineers canceled vacations. Medics stocked field kits with extra supplies. No one was told the full plan, only what the